Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a close look at Bless Me, Ultima.
Oh, a classic.
It really is. This book, it's just brimming with magic and
Uh-huh.
faith and this just raw beauty of the New Mexico landscape.
It's so evocative.
Right. We're going to explore how Rudolfo Anaya weaves this incredible coming-of-age tale
Yeah.
set against the backdrop of 1940s Hispano life.
A time and place where ancient traditions were clashing with the pull of, modern America.
Exactly. Have you ever felt that tug between two worlds?
I think we all have, in a way.
Yeah, that's exactly what we'll be uncovering today as we follow young Antonio's journey.
It's fascinating, how Anaya uses the setting itself, rural New Mexico,
Yeah.
in the 1940s to actually mirror Antonio's internal conflict.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's literally standing between these two worlds trying to figure out where he belongs.
Right.
And you see his family caught between the old ways, the farming, the healing traditions,
Uh-huh.
and then these new opportunities that are pulling people away from the land.
It's like Antonio is at a crossroads, isn't he?
He really is.
And then you bring in Ultima, this enigmatic curandera.
A folk healer
Right. And she comes to live with Antonio's family.
becomes this guiding force for him.
Almost like a spiritual bridge between those two worlds you mentioned.
Exactly. And her arrival, it kind of disrupts the family dynamic
I read.
in a way that creates this beautiful tension.
Oh, how so?
Well, you have Antonio's father, Gabriel.
Yeah.
He's restless, always dreaming of that vaquero life.
Out on the open range.
Yeah, he represents that yearning for something beyond the familiar, beyond the confines of their village.
Makes sense.
Then you have Antonio's mother, Maria,
Uh-huh.
rooted in the traditions of her family, her farming family.
Okay.
And she envisions Antonio becoming a priest,
A priest.
a path that represents stability, spiritual devotion.
So Antonio is literally surrounded by these contrasting visions of what his future could hold.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what kind of impact that has on a young boy who's already trying to make sense of his place in the world.
Right.
But Ultima, where does she fit into all of this?
She embodies a different way of knowing, a connection to the earth and its mysteries
Okay.
that goes beyond the Catholic faith that surrounds Antonio.
Interesting.
She understands the healing power of plants, the whispers of the wind,
Wow.
even the language of animals.
That's powerful.
And this is what draws Antonio to her, this sense that there's more to the world than what he's been taught.
Than what he's learned in catechism.
Exactly.
And that connection to nature is so beautifully captured in the symbol of the golden carp.
Oh, yes.
Right. This mythical creature.
Embodies the power and mystery of the natural world.
And it just calls to Antonio on such a deep level.
It's almost like a competing belief system.
To what he's learning in church.
Precisely. The golden carp, it's not just a magical creature.
Right.
It represents a different way of seeing the world, a belief system that's rooted in the natural order,
I see.
in those cycles of life and death, and in the interconnectedness of all things.
And this challenges the more rigid doctrines of the Catholic Church.
Which often separates humanity from nature.
So you've got all this swirling around Antonio, his parents' conflicting hopes for him, Ultima's wisdom and magic, this pull towards a more primal understanding of the world, embodied by that golden carp.
Right.
And then
And then,
Anaya introduces Tenorio,
ooh.
a truly menacing figure in the village,
Yeah.
whose daughters are rumored to be brujas. Tenorio represents that darkness that exists alongside the beauty and magic
Absolutely.
in Antonio's world.
He embodies fear, hatred, and a desire for revenge that threatens to destroy everything Antonio holds dear.
And this darkness explodes into violence.
Yes.
With the murder of Lupido.
A war-scarred man driven to madness.
This is where Antonio really gets a taste of the brutal side of life.
The consequences of unchecked anger and pain.
It makes you think about how much a single act of violence can shatter the innocence of a child.
Lupido's death is a turning point for Antonio.
Who knows?
He's forced to confront the complexities of good and evil,
Okay.
the gray areas that exist between that black and white teaching of the church.
And this is where his faith starts to get shaky.
Right.
He's seeing things that he can't reconcile with the idea of a loving and all-powerful God.
And then there's Florence,
Antonio's friend.
who has completely rejected organized religion because of the suffering he's seen.
He's seen too much pain, too much injustice to believe in a God who allows such things to happen.
His perspective really challenges Antonio.
It's like he's voicing the doubts that Antonio's too afraid to admit to himself.
Florence represents a different kind of questioning,
Okay.
a more defiant rejection of what he sees as hypocrisy in the church.
Interesting.
His cynicism forces Antonio to grapple with these really tough questions.
Like what?
Well, like if God is truly good, why does suffering exist? Why do bad things happen to good people?
Those are questions that theologians have struggled with for centuries.
And Anaya doesn't shy away from presenting those complexities through the eyes of a child.
And as if Antonio doesn't have enough to deal with internally,
Right.
the conflict with Tenorio escalates.
He does.
He vows to avenge his daughters
Yeah.
and becomes fixated on killing Ultima's owl.
Which he sees as the source of her power.
This is where you start to see the clash between these two belief systems become really dangerous.
The owl isn't just a pet to Ultima.
Right.
It represents her spirit, her connection to the forces of nature, her wisdom.
Makes sense.
And in some ways, it represents the magic that Tenorio fears and wants to destroy.
So when he sets his sights on the owl,
It's a direct attack on Ultima's world, her way of being.
it's like Tenorio is trying to extinguish the light that Ultima represents.
Yeah.
The light that Antonio is so drawn to.
Exactly.
And this sets the stage for a truly heartbreaking climax.
Oh, yes.
A confrontation that will force Antonio to face the harsh realities of life and death,
Oh,
and to question everything he thought he knew about the world.
absolutely. You know, as Antonio's navigating this turbulent world, he's also approaching a major milestone.
Oh, right, his first communion.
Exactly. Think about the pressure he must be feeling.
Yeah, I mean, his mother sees this as a kind of spiritual armor, right?
Like a way to shield him from the darkness he's encountering.
It's like his first communion is supposed to be this defining moment, solidifying his path toward the priesthood.
The path his mother has envisioned for him.
But how can he embrace that when he's wrestling with so much doubt?
Right.
When the teachings of the church seem to contradict what he's experiencing in the real world.
You see this tension play out so vividly as Antonio prepares for his first communion. He's attending catechism classes, memorizing prayers, confessing his sins to Father Burns.
All while these bigger questions about God and suffering and the nature of good and evil are swirling in his mind.
Exactly.
And amidst all this, he has Florence
Whispering in his ear.
challenging the very foundation of his beliefs.
Remember that scene where Florence confronts Antonio about the problem of suffering?
Oh, yeah.
He asks, why would God create a world with so much pain if he really loved us?
It's such a powerful moment because it's a question that so many people grapple with.
Regardless of their faith.
Exactly.
What's brilliant about that scene is that it forces the reader to engage with these profound questions alongside Antonio.
And Anaya doesn't offer easy answers.
He suggests that faith is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Doubt is a natural part of that journey, a way of wrestling with these big, unanswerable questions.
It's like Antonio is being pulled in two directions.
He is.
He's trying to reconcile the teachings of the church with the reality of the world around him,
With the wisdom he's learning from Ultima.
with the doubts that Florence is planting in his mind.
And you see this internal struggle reflected in those scenes where Antonio and his friends are preparing for confession.
Oh, yeah.
They're trying to understand the concept of sin, the weight of their actions.
Through the lens of their childhood experiences.
It's both humorous and deeply insightful.
I love how Anaya captures the awkwardness and earnestness of those moments.
Like when the boys are trying to one-up each other with their confessions as if sin is some sort of competition.
Oh, totally.
And then there's Father Burns' story about eternity.
With a bird carrying grains of sand across the ocean.
Trying to explain the vastness of time and God's power.
That image is so striking.
It highlights the challenge of trying to grasp these abstract concepts when you're a child.
And for Antonio, those concepts are becoming even more muddled as he witnesses the violence and suffering around him.
So the day of his first communion arrives.
There's this sense of anticipation of a spiritual threshold being crossed.
But for Antonio, it doesn't bring the clarity or the comfort he was hoping for.
Instead of experiencing a profound connection to God, he's bombarded with doubts.
He's searching for answers, for reassurance, but he finds only silence.
It's a powerful moment because it reflects the experience of so many people who struggle with their faith.
It's not always about finding answers.
Sometimes it's about learning to live with the questions.
And right after this pivotal moment, we have that symbolic scene with the vitamin kid.
The boy who's always been this symbol of speed and vitality.
Remember how he's always a blur of motion, almost superhuman in his running?
But after Antonio's communion, something shifts.
Suddenly, the vitamin kid is walking calmly with a girl.
And he doesn't even respond to Antonio's challenge for a race.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the changes happening within Antonio.
He's starting to let go of that childhood need to compete, to conquer.
And even though Antonio wins the race, it's a hollow victory.
It's like he's realizing that some wins feel like losses, that growing up means leaving certain things behind.
Even if you're not quite sure what you're moving towards.
That sense of transition of things irrevocably shifting continues as Antonio's family returns to El Puerto for the harvest.
Remember how his uncles had hoped that Antonio would embrace their way of life, become a farmer like them?
They see in him a continuation of their traditions.
A connection to the land that's slipping away as more and more people are drawn to the cities, to the allure of modern life.
But Antonio's world has expanded.
He's grappling with questions of faith, with the mysteries of Ultima's magic, with the harsh realities of good and evil.
He's no longer the boy who left El Puerto just a few months earlier.
He's on the cusp of something new, something unknown.
And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, we know that the conflict with Tenorio is coming to a head.
This tension that's been simmering beneath the surface is about to erupt, forcing Antonio to confront not only the darkness in the world, but also the darkness within himself.
So we left off with Antonio feeling that shift, that unease, as Tenorio's rage continues to grow.
And El Puerto, this place that usually represents peace and connection to the earth, becomes the setting for this final devastating clash.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if there are places where evil can't touch.
Right.
Or if darkness can just seep into even the most sacred spaces.
What strikes me is how Tenorio's vendetta against Ultima transcends a simple personal conflict.
Okay.
He represents a worldview that sees magic, anything outside the rigid confines of the church, as inherently evil.
So Ultima becomes a scapegoat for his fear of the unknown, of what he can't control.
Exactly.
And Antonio is caught in the middle, isn't he?
He is.
He's seen the good that Ultima's magic can do.
The healing, the connection to nature.
But he's also been raised with the church's warnings about witchcraft.
About the dangers of straying from the path of righteousness.
It's like he's trying to reconcile these two opposing forces within himself while the world around him is falling apart.
That internal struggle is so central to Antonio's coming of age.
Right.
He's witnessing the limitations of both belief systems, the church, and Ultima's magic, as they're tested against the very real darkness that Tenorio embodies.
Think about that chilling scene where Tenorio confronts Ultima at the bar.
Oh, yeah.
The air practically crackles with his hatred, his conviction that she's a bruja, a witch.
It's almost like you can feel the violence brewing even before anything actually happens.
And then Tenorio's remaining daughters die.
And while Anaya never explicitly states the cause, the implication is clear.
It's as if Ultima's curse, brought on by Tenorio's relentless attacks, has manifested in a terrifyingly real way.
That ambiguity is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the question of whether Ultima is capable of wielding such destructive power.
Right.
Whether her magic can be used for both good and evil.
And if so, what does that say about the nature of magic itself?
Is it a neutral force shaped by the intentions of the user?
Or is there an inherent darkness that can corrupt even the purest intentions?
Those questions linger even as the story unfolds and the fear in the village intensifies.
The attacks on the Tellez family.
The stones raining down, the tools flying through the air as if possessed by some unseen force.
It's terrifying because it feels so random, so unexplainable.
Those attacks really blur the lines between the natural and the supernatural.
Yeah, they tap into our primal fear of the unknown, the forces beyond our understanding.
And in the face of this chaos, Ultima responds not with prayers or holy water,
but with a ritual that feels ancient, almost primal.
That scene where she builds the platform of juniper branches.
Calling on Antonio to help, because he understands the power in the tree.
It's such a departure from the Catholic practices that Antonio has been taught.
It highlights the limitations of any single belief system in the face of true darkness.
Ultima's ritual is a reminder that there are other ways of knowing, other ways of interacting with the world.
That exist outside the confines of organized religion.
It's a connection to the earth, to the cycles of nature that offers a different kind of power.
A power that Antonio is only beginning to understand.
But even as Ultima is trying to combat this evil, Antonio's personal world is unraveling.
His brothers return from the war.
Disillusioned and rejecting their parents' dreams for them.
They announce their departure for Las Vegas.
Leaving their family heartbroken and their father, Gabriel, spiraling deeper into despair.
It's another layer of loss, another sign that the old ways, the traditional dreams, are crumbling.
Gabriel, who once longed for the freedom of the open range, is now trapped by the weight of his unfulfilled desires.
And Antonio, caught between his parents' grief and his own burgeoning sense of independence turns even more to Ultima for guidance, for solace.
But that time is running out.
Tenorio, consumed by his rage, commits the ultimate act of violence, shooting and killing Ultima's owl.
It's a gut-wrenching moment.
Not just because of the cruelty, but because it signals the end of Ultima's time in this world.
The owl represented Ultima's spirit, her connection to the magical world.
And its death is a foreshadowing of her own impending fate.
And as Antonio buries the owl, he's not just mourning the loss of a bird.
He's mourning the loss of a way of life, of a way of understanding the world that Ultima embodied.
And Ultima, knowing her time is near, leaves Antonio with a final blessing.
Always have the strength to live, love life, and if despair enters your heart, look for me in the evenings when the wind is gentle and the owls sing in the hills.
I shall be with you.
There's such a profound sense of peace in those words.
A recognition that death is not the end, but a transition into something else, something beyond our comprehension.
It's a message of hope, of resilience, that echoes through the novel's ending.
Even in the face of such profound loss, Antonio is left with Ultima's wisdom, her stories, her connection to the earth.
He carries that with him as he navigates the complexities of adolescence, the challenges of growing up in a world where easy answers are elusive.
And as Antonio returns to school, to the routine of his life, we're left with that final image of the vitamin kid, walking calmly with a girl.
No longer the blur of motion.
No longer driven by that restless energy of youth.
It's such a subtle but powerful symbol of the inevitable transformations that life throws our way.
It speaks to the bittersweet nature of growing up, the loss of innocence that comes with experience, but also the possibility of finding new connections, new sources of meaning.
Just as Antonio must grapple with the loss of Ultima, so too must we all learn to let go of the past, embrace the changes that shape us, and find our own paths toward the light.
And so we conclude our deep dive into Bless Me, Ultima.
We hope this exploration has sparked your own reflections on faith, on the power of nature, and on the challenges and triumphs of coming of age.
What resonates with you most strongly from this story? What questions linger in your mind?
Keep those questions close, dear listener, as you continue your own journey of discovery.